The blizzard hit so fast that Grace Donnelly didn't even have time to pray before her horse stumbled and sent her tumbling into a snowbank that swallowed her whole. She clawed her way out, gasping for air, her fingers already numb inside her thin gloves. The stagecoach she'd been traveling with had vanished somewhere ahead in the whiteout, the driver either unaware or uncaring that she'd fallen behind when her horse had broken away during a particularly vicious gust. Now she stood alone in the mountain pass between Sacramento and the Nevada border, December 1875, offering no mercy to a woman foolish enough to travel alone. Her horse was gone. She could hear nothing over the howling wind, could see nothing but white in every direction. Grace tried to walk, to move in any direction that might lead to shelter, but the snow was already knee-deep, and her skirts were soaked through. Her teeth chattered so violently she bit her tongue and tasted blood. She'd left San Francisco 3 days ago with such hope, heading to meet her aunt in Virginia City after her father's death had left her with nothing. Now she would die in the snow, and nobody would find her body until spring. She took another step and fell again, this time unable to find the strength to rise. The cold was seeping into her bones, making her drowsy. She'd heard that freezing to death was peaceful once you stopped fighting it. Grace closed her eyes, wondering if that was true, wondering if her father was waiting for her somewhere beyond this white hell. Then strong hands grabbed her under the arms and hauled her up like she weighed nothing at all. Grace tried to open her eyes, but her lashes were frozen together. She felt herself being lifted, pressed against something warm and solid, heard a deep voice saying words she couldn't quite make out over the wind. A man's voice, rough and urgent. "Don't you dare give up," the voice said, clearer now. "I've got you, just hold on." Grace tried to respond, but her lips wouldn't move. She felt motion, the swaying rhythm of a horse moving through snow, and then nothing at all. When consciousness returned, it came in pieces. Warmth first, blessed warmth that made her skin prickle and burn. Then pain in her fingers and toes, sharp and agonizing. Grace whimpered and tried to pull away from it, but gentle hands held her still. "Easy now," that same rough voice said. "I know it hurts, but that means you're thawing out. You're going to be all right." Grace forced her eyes open. She was lying on a narrow bed covered in thick furs and wool blankets. A fire crackled in a stone hearth nearby, filling a small cabin with warmth and flickering light. The man sitting beside her bed had the most striking face she'd ever seen, all hard angles and sharp planes, with eyes so dark they were nearly black. His hair was the same deep brown, worn longer than was fashionable, touching his collar. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most, with the weathered skin of a man who spent his life outdoors. "Where am I?" Grace managed to croak out. "My hunting cabin, about 5 miles from where I found you trying to become a snow sculpture." He stood and moved to a pot hanging over the fire, ladling something into a tin cup. "You're lucky I was checking my trap lines. Another hour and you'd have been past saving." He brought her the cup, and she smelled beef broth, rich and salty. Her hands shook too badly to hold it, so he supported her head while she sipped. The warm liquid burned all the way down, but it was the most wonderful thing she'd ever tasted. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought I was going to die." "You almost did." He set the cup aside and sat back down, studying her with those intense dark eyes. "I'm Zachary Wells. This is my land, what there is of it. What in God's name were you doing out in a blizzard?" "I was with a stagecoach heading to Virginia City. My horse got spooked and bolted, and by the time I got him under control, I couldn't find the road anymore." Grace tried to sit up, but her body refused to cooperate. "The stagecoach didn't stop. They probably never saw you fall back." The driver would have been focused on just keeping his team moving through the storm. Zachary's expression remained neutral, unreadable. "You have people expecting you in Virginia City, my aunt. She's expecting me before Christmas." Grace looked toward a small window, but the glass was completely covered in frost. "How long have I been here? I found you yesterday afternoon. It's morning now, though you can't tell it by looking outside. The storm's still going strong, and even if it stopped right now, the pass won't be clear for days. You're stuck here for a while." The reality of her situation settled over Grace like a weight. She was alone in an isolated cabin with a strange man, miles from anywhere, with no way to contact her aunt or let anyone know she was alive. Her reputation would be in tatters even if she survived. But the alternative had been freezing to death in the snow, so she supposed she should be grateful. "I appreciate you saving my life, Mr. Wells," she said carefully. "I don't suppose there's a town nearby where I might find proper lodging until the pass clears." Something flickered in his dark eyes, too quick to identify. "Nearest town is Chico, and that's a good 20 miles north." "We're in the middle of nowhere, Miss Donnelly. Grace Donnelly. Miss Donnelly. You're welcome to be uncomfortable about staying here, but unless you can walk 20 miles through chest-deep snow while still recovering from near-fatal exposure, you don't have much choice. I'll sleep by the fire. You can have the bed. I won't touch you." The words were blunt, almost harsh, delivered without any warmth or reassurance. Grace studied him more closely and realized that, despite saving her life, Zachary Wells seemed to take no particular pleasure in her company. He wasn't leering at her or making inappropriate suggestions, but he wasn't being especially kind either. He was simply stating facts, his tone suggesting he found the whole situation to be an inconvenience. "I didn't mean to offend you," Grace said quietly. "I'm grateful for the rescue and for your hospitality, truly." Zachary stood and moved to the fire, his back to her. "You should rest. Your body needs time to recover. I'll check on you later." He pulled on a heavy coat and left the cabin without another word, letting in a blast of frigid air before the door closed behind him. Grace lay back against the pillows, confused and exhausted. Her rescuer was the strangest man she'd ever encountered, saving her life with one hand while pushing her away with the other. It was like he'd done his duty in pulling her from the snow, but now resented having to actually care for her. She closed her eyes and slept, too tired to puzzle it out. Over the next few days, Grace grew stronger. The pain in her extremities faded to a dull ache, and she was able to sit up, then stand, then walk around the small cabin without assistance. Zachary provided food and fresh water, kept the fire burning hot, and checked on her welfare with mechanical efficiency. He spoke only when necessary, answering her questions with short, clipped responses that discouraged conversation. Grace learned that he'd been a soldier in the war between the states, fighting for the Union, and had come west afterward looking for land and solitude. He rang cattle when the weather permitted, trapped furs in winter, and came to this cabin when he wanted to be away from the small ranch he maintained closer to Chico. He had no wife, no family, and from what Grace could tell, no friends. He seemed perfectly content to live in complete isolation. "Don't you get lonely?" she asked one evening as they ate a simple dinner of salt pork and beans. It was the 4th day of her stay, and the storm had finally stopped, though the snow outside remained deep and impassable. Zachary looked at her with those unreadable dark eyes. "No. But surely you must miss having people to talk to share your life with." "I had plenty of people around me during the war, watched most of them die. The ones who survived came home broken." He ate another spoonful of beans, his expression never changing. "Solitude is better." "That's a sad way to live." It's the way I choose to live, Miss Donnelly. I'm sorry if you find it unsatisfying, but I didn't ask for company." The words should have stung, but Grace was beginning to understand that Zachary Wells wasn't cruel, just closed off. He reminded her of a house with all the shutters locked tight, keeping out light and air and life. She wondered what had happened during the war to make him this way, what horrors he'd seen that made him prefer complete isolation to human connection. "Tell me about your family," she tried, changing tactics. "Where are you from originally?" "Ohio." "My parents are dead. No siblings. Is there a point to these questions? I'm just trying to have a conversation. We're going to be stuck together for at least another week, according to you. We might as well be civil to each other." "We are civil. I haven't asked you to leave and you haven't complained about my cooking. That's about as civil as I get." Grace set down her fork with more force than necessary. "Has anyone ever told you that you're infuriating?" "Yes." Zachary stood and collected her plate. "You should get more rest. I'll check the snow conditions tomorrow and see if the pass is clearing." He turned away to clean the dishes, dismissing her completely. Grace felt a surge of frustration mixed with something else, something she couldn't quite name. Underneath all that ice and indifference, she sensed something wounded, something in pain. Zachary Wells had saved her life without hesitation, had cared for her with surprising gentleness despite his gruff manner. He wasn't heartless. He was just very, very good at pretending to be. The next morning, Grace woke to find Zachary already gone from the cabin. She could see his tracks leading away through the snow toward what she assumed was the mountain pass. The fire had been built up before he left, and there was coffee warming on the hearth along with cornbread wrapped in cloth. He might claim to want nothing to do with her, but he was taking care of her nonetheless. Grace poured herself coffee and stood at the window, looking out at the winter landscape. The storm had transformed everything into a pristine white wilderness, beautiful and deadly. She owed this difficult, distant man her life, and somehow that debt had become more than just gratitude. She wanted to understand him, to find out what had frozen his heart so completely. When Zachary returned several hours later, his expression was grim. "The pass is still blocked. Even if you could make it through on foot, which you couldn't, it's not safe. There's risk of avalanche from all the fresh snow. We're stuck here at least another week, maybe two." "I see." Grace had expected this news, but it still made her stomach sink. "My aunt will be worried sick." "Can't be helped. Once the pass clears, I'll take you to Chico myself. You can send her a telegram from there." "Thank you." Grace hesitated, then decided to push forward. "Mr. Wells, I don't want to be a burden to you, but I also don't want to spend the next 2 weeks in hostile silence. Can we at least try to be friendly to each other? I'm not hostile. You're not exactly warm either." Zachary pulled off his heavy coat and hung it by the door, his movements careful and controlled. "I'm keeping you alive and safe, Miss Donnelly. That's all I can offer. If you need more than that, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed." "Why?" The question burst out of her before she could stop it. "Why are you so determined to keep everyone at arm's length? What happened to you?" For a moment, something flashed across his face, raw and painful. Then it was gone, the shutters slamming closed again. "That's none of your concern. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check the traps." He was gone again before Grace could respond, leaving her alone in the cabin with more questions than answers. That evening, Grace decided to take action. When Zachary returned with 2 rabbits for dinner, she was waiting with a proposal. "Teach me something," she said. He looked at her like she'd started speaking another language. "What?" "Teach me something useful. How to skin a rabbit or make better coffee or rid tracks in the snow. Anything. I'm going mad with boredom, and you clearly don't want to have conversations, so at least let me learn something practical while I'm stuck here." Zachary studied her for a long moment, and Grace could see the war happening behind his eyes. He didn't want to let her in, even this small amount. But finally, he nodded once. "Fine. You can help prepare dinner, but don't expect me to make it pleasant." "I wouldn't dream of it," Grace said, unable to keep the smile off her face. Zachary taught her how to skin and clean the rabbits with quick, efficient movements, showing her where to cut and how to avoid damaging the meat. His hands were scarred and calloused, but they moved with surprising grace. Grace tried not to be squeamish, focusing on learning the skill rather than dwelling on the blood. "You're better at this than I expected," Zachary said, and it took Grace a moment to realize it was a compliment. "I'm stronger than I look," she replied. "I had to be after my mother died. My father needed help with everything and we couldn't afford servants." "What did your father do?" "He was a clerk in San Francisco. We didn't have much, but we were happy." Grace's throat tightened. "He died of influenza 3 months ago. That's why I'm going to Virginia City. My aunt is the only family I have left." Zachary was quiet for a moment, focused on preparing the meat for cooking. "I'm sorry for your loss." The words were simple, but Grace heard genuine sympathy in them. It was the first real emotion she'd heard from him, and it felt like a victory. "Thank you. Were you close to your parents?" "My mother died when I was young, fever. My father raised me alone until he passed right before the war started." Zachary added the rabbit to a pot with water and vegetables. "He was a good man, taught me to work hard and treat people fairly. I like to think he'd be proud of what I've built out here." "I'm sure he would be." They fell into a comfortable silence as the stew cooked, and for the first time since Grace had woken in this cabin, the atmosphere didn't feel quite so oppressive. Zachary was still guarded, still distant, but he'd shared something real with her. It was a beginning. Over the following days, Grace and Zachary fell into a routine. Each morning, he would check the pass and the trap lines while she tidied the cabin and prepared their simple breakfast. They would eat together in relative silence, and then he would teach her something new. She learned how to read animal tracks, how to identify which trees made the best firewood, how to tell if snow conditions were stable or dangerous. Zachary was a patient teacher when he wanted to be, and Grace proved to be a quick study. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and slowly, carefully, Grace would coax stories out of him. She learned that he'd joined the army at 19, full of idealism and patriotic fervor. He'd believed in the cause, believed that fighting for the Union was the right thing to do. But 4 years of war had stripped away that idealism, leaving behind only scars and nightmares. "I was at Gettysburg," he said one night, staring into the flames. 3 days in hell. We won, technically, but I lost my best friend, my captain, and a dozen men from my regiment. After that, victory and defeat started to feel like the same thing. Grace wanted to reach out and touch his hand to offer comfort, but she sensed he would pull away. "I can't imagine what that was like." "No, you can't. Nobody can unless they were there." Zachary's jaw was tight. "After the war, I couldn't go back to Ohio. Everything reminded me of who I used to be, this boy who thought he understood the world. So I came west looking for empty space, somewhere I could just exist without having to pretend to be whole." "But you are whole," Grace said softly. "You're just wounded. That's not the same thing." Zachary finally looked at her, and the pain in his dark eyes nearly broke her heart. "You don't know what you're talking about, Grace." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips made her pulse quicken. "Then help me understand," she said. "Let me in, Zachary." For a moment she thought he might. His guard dropped just enough that she could see the lonely, hurting man beneath all the ice. But then he stood abruptly and walked away. "I need to bring in more firewood," he said, and left her alone. Grace sat by the fire for a long time after he'd gone, trying to sort through the tangle of feelings in her chest. She'd known Zachary Wells for just over a week, and he was the most frustrating, closed-off man she'd ever encountered. He was also brave and capable, with a core of decency that he tried hard to hide. When he taught her things, she could see his passion for this wild land. When he spoke about the war, she could hear the grief he refused to acknowledge. He was a man who had decided to stop living because living hurt too much, and Grace found that unbearably sad. She also found herself attracted to him in a way that was both exciting and terrifying. It wasn't just his strong features or his capable hands, though those certainly didn't hurt. It was the glimpses of the man he used to be, the idealistic boy who'd believed in causes worth fighting for. That person was still in there somewhere, buried under years of pain and isolation. Grace knew she should be thinking about her own future, about getting to Virginia City and starting a new life with her aunt. Instead, she was thinking about how to thaw a frozen heart, how to reach a man who didn't want to be reached. When Zachary returned, his arms full of split wood, Grace made a decision. "Tomorrow I want you to take me outside," she said. "Really outside, not just to the woodpile. I want to see this place properly. It's too cold. You're still recovering. I'm fine, and you know it. I'm stronger every day. Please, Zachary. I'm going mad being cooped up in here." He stacked the wood by the hearth, taking his time before answering. "If the weather holds, I'll take you out for a short walk. But you do exactly what I say. This land doesn't forgive mistakes. I promise." The next day dawned clear and brutally cold. Zachary made Grace bundle up in every piece of warm clothing they could find, including his spare coat over her own. She looked ridiculous, but she was warm. He fashioned crude snowshoes from branches and leather, showing her how to walk with them so she wouldn't sink into the deep snow. They set out mid-morning, Zachary leading the way through a landscape so beautiful it made Grace's chest ache. The sun sparkled off the snow like scattered diamonds. Tall pines stood sentinel around them, their branches heavy with white. The air was so clear and sharp it almost hurt to breathe. Grace could see for miles from the high elevation, mountain peaks stretching away in every direction. "It's incredible," she breathed. "I've never seen anything so beautiful." "This is why I stay," Zachary said, and there was a warmth in his voice she'd never heard before. "Out here, everything is honest. The land doesn't lie or pretend. It just is what it is. You really prefer this to people?" "I prefer it to watching people die." He started walking again, his long strides easy and confident even in the deep snow. "Out here, the only person I can disappoint is myself." Grace followed him, struggling a bit with the snowshoes but determined to keep up. "Is that what you think?" "That you disappointed people? I know I did. I was supposed to bring the men in my unit home safely. I was their sergeant by the end of the war. They trusted me to keep them alive." His voice was flat, emotionless. 12 of them died under my command. 12 men with families waiting for them, and I couldn't save them. That wasn't your fault. You were in a war. Tell that to their widows. Tell that to their children." Zachary stopped and turned to face her, and his expression was raw with old grief. "I see their faces every night when I close my eyes, Grace. Every single one of them. I remember their last words, the way they called for their mothers, for their wives. I held them while they died, and I couldn't do anything to help them. So don't tell me it wasn't my fault. I was there. I know what I failed to do." Grace's heart broke for him. She moved closer, her snowshoes awkward but her intention clear. "Zachary, you can't carry that alone. It's too heavy. Those men died in service to something bigger than themselves, and I'm sure they didn't blame you. I'm sure they were grateful to have you with them at the end. You don't know that." "No, but I know you. In just over a week, I've come to know the kind of man you are. You're good and decent, and you saved my life without a second thought. You're capable of so much kindness when you let yourself be. Those men who served with you, they saw that too. They trusted you because you deserved that trust. Tears were freezing on Grace's cheeks, but she didn't care. She reached out and took Zachary's gloved hand in hers. You've been punishing yourself for 10 years for something that wasn't your fault. Don't you think you've suffered enough? Don't you think you deserve to live again? Zachary looked down at their joined hands and something shifted in his expression. The ice was cracking, just a little. When he looked back up at her, his dark eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't know how, he whispered. I don't know how to be anything other than this. Then let me help you, Grace said. Let me show you that life can be more than just survival, please. For a long moment they stood in the snow-covered wilderness, two people damaged by loss and grief, holding onto each other like lifelines. Then Zachary pulled his hand free, but gently. We should get back. You've been out long enough. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. Grace nodded and followed him back to the cabin, hope blooming warm in her chest despite the frigid air. That night, something changed between them. Zachary was still quiet, still guarded, but he sat closer to Grace by the fire. When their hands accidentally touched as he passed her a cup of coffee, he didn't immediately pull away. And when Grace asked him to tell her a happy memory from before the war, he did. My father used to take me fishing in the summer, Zachary said, a small smile playing at his lips. We'd wake up before dawn and walk to this creek about a mile from our house. We'd spend the whole day there, just the two of us, talking about everything and nothing. He'd tell me stories about his own father, about growing up poor in Pennsylvania, about how he met my mother. Those were good days. He sounds like he was wonderful. He was. He taught me that a man's worth is measured by how he treats people, especially people who can't do anything for him in return. He said that kindness costs nothing but means everything. Zachary stared into the fire. I try to live by that, even now. It's harder than it sounds. You saved my life. That was kind. That was just decent. Anyone would have done the same. I'm not so sure. A lot of men would have taken advantage of a helpless woman in an isolated cabin. Grace held his gaze. You've been nothing but honorable, Zachary. Your father would be proud. He didn't respond, but his expression softened, and Grace counted it as another small victory. The days continued to pass, each one bringing Zachary and Grace closer together. They talked more, shared more, and slowly the cabin began to feel less like a prison and more like a sanctuary. Grace found herself watching Zachary when he didn't know she was looking, admiring the way he moved, the rare smiles that transformed his serious face, the gentleness in his hands when he tended the fire or repaired a piece of equipment. She was falling in love with him. She realized one morning as she watched him shave in the small mirror by the window. It was reckless and probably foolish, but her heart didn't care about logic. Zachary Wells, with all his walls and wounds, had somehow become the most important person in her world. The question was whether he felt anything for her beyond obligation. Grace got her answer 3 days later, during another walk in the snow. They'd gone further this time, with Zachary showing her a frozen stream where he fished in warmer months. Grace was admiring the ice formations when her foot slipped on a hidden rock. She would have fallen hard, but Zachary caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist and pulling her against his chest. Careful, he said, his voice rough. I didn't save you from freezing just to have you crack your skull. Grace looked up at him, acutely aware of how close they were, how strong his arms felt around her. Thank you for catching me. I'll always catch you, Zachary said, and then seemed to realize what he'd said. Instead of pulling away, though, he stayed right where he was, his dark eyes searching her face. Grace, "What?" she whispered, her heart pounding. "I shouldn't feel this way. You're going to Virginia City and I'm staying here and there's no future in this, but I can't help it." His voice was low, almost anguished. "Ever since I pulled you from that snow, you've been breaking down every wall I built. You make me want things I thought I'd given up on. You make me want to be the man I was before the war destroyed me." "You're not destroyed," Grace said fiercely. "You're hurt, but you're not broken, and I don't want the man you were before. I want you, Zachary, exactly as you are right now. You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do. I'm falling in love with you." The words tumbled out before Grace could stop them, but she didn't want to stop them. "I know it's fast and I know it's complicated, but it's true. You're a good man, Zachary Wells, whether you believe it or not, and I think underneath all that ice and fear you might feel the same way about me." Zachary's grip on her tightened. "I do," he said roughly. "God help me, I do. I started falling for you the moment you woke up in my cabin and looked at me like I was a hero instead of a broken shell of a man. Every day since has made it worse. Grace, I'm in love with you and it terrifies me." "Why?" "Because everyone I've ever loved has died or left me. Because I don't know how to be what you need. Because I've spent so long alone that I've forgotten how to be any other way." Grace reached up and cupped his cold face in her gloved hands. "Then we'll figure it out together. You don't have to be perfect, Zachary. You just have to try." "Can you do that? Can you try for me?" Instead of answering with words, Zachary bent his head and kissed her. It was tentative at first, almost hesitant, as if he expected her to push him away. But Grace pressed closer, kissing him back with all the love and hope in her heart. His lips were cold but soft, and he tasted like coffee and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grace saw tears on Zachary's weathered cheeks. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "That's not your decision to make. I choose you, Zachary. Now you just have to choose to let me." He kissed her again, longer this time, his arms wrapped tight around her as if he'd never let go. And standing there in the frozen wilderness where he'd saved her life, Grace felt warmer than she ever had in her entire life. That evening they talked seriously about the future. Grace sat beside Zachary on the narrow bed, their shoulders touching, their hands intertwined. "I can't ask you to give up Virginia City," Zachary said. "Your aunt is expecting you. She's your family." "I could write to her, explain the situation. Maybe she could come here instead, or I could visit her once the spring thaw comes." Grace squeezed his hand. "I don't want to leave you, Zachary, but I also need to know that you're truly willing to let me into your life. Not just for now, but for always. I want that more than anything. But Grace, life out here is hard. This cabin is just for winter. My actual ranch is closer to Chico, but it's still isolated. The work is backbreaking. The winters are brutal. You'd be giving up any chance of an easier life in a real town." "Do you think I care about easy?" Grace turned to face him fully. "I care about you. I care about building a life with someone I love. Everything else is just details." Zachary brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Then yes. Stay with me. Be my wife if you'll have me. I can't promise I'll be easy to live with. I have nightmares and dark moods, and sometimes I'll probably push you away without meaning to. But I swear I'll love you with everything I have. I'll work every day to be worthy of you." "You're already worthy of me," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "And yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it." They sealed the promise with another kiss, this one full of joy and relief, and the sweet certainty of love returned. Outside, the winter wind howled, but inside the cabin, warmth bloomed. 2 weeks after Zachary had pulled Grace from the snow, the mountain pass finally cleared enough for travel. Zachary saddled his 2 horses, packing supplies and making sure Grace was bundled warmly for the journey. They would go to Chico first, where Grace could send a telegram to her aunt explaining the situation. Then they would find a preacher willing to marry them. The ride down the mountain was treacherous but manageable, with Zachary leading the way and constantly checking to make sure Grace was all right. When they finally rode into Chico on a bright January morning, Grace felt like she'd traveled from one world to another. The small town was busy with miners and ranchers, the streets muddy with melting snow. They found a telegraph office first. Grace composed a careful message to her aunt in Virginia City. Delayed by storm, safe now, met someone, getting married, will visit in spring, please understand. Love, Grace. It was inadequate, but it would have to do. Grace would write a longer letter later, explaining everything properly. For now, her aunt would at least know she was alive. Next, they found a hotel where Grace could get a proper room and clean up. Zachary waited downstairs while she bathed and changed into her only decent dress, a simple blue wool that had survived the journey better than expected. When she came down, the look on Zachary's face made her blush. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "So are you," Grace replied, and meant it. They found a preacher that afternoon, a kind, older man who agreed to marry them right there in his small church. There were no guests, no flowers, no fancy wedding breakfast. But when Zachary slipped a simple gold band on Grace's finger and promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his life, Grace felt like the luckiest woman in the world. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said with a smile. Zachary did, thoroughly, and Grace laughed against his lips. They spent their wedding night in the hotel, and Grace learned that beneath Zachary's gruff exterior was a tender, passionate man who worshipped her body with reverent hands and whispered words of love. He was gentle and patient, making sure her first time was as painless as possible, and when they finally came together completely, Grace felt like they'd become one person. Afterward, lying in his arms, she traced the scars on his chest and back. "Tell me about each one," she said softly. "Are you sure they're not pretty stories? I want to know everything about you, Zachary, the good and the bad." So he told her, his voice quiet in the darkness. Each scar represented a battle, a close call, a reminder that he'd survived when so many hadn't. Grace kissed each one as he talked, as if she could heal the old wounds with her love. "Thank you for trusting me with this," she said when he'd finished. "Thank you for not running away. I'll never run from you, I promise." In the morning, they purchased supplies for the ranch and began the journey to Zachary's real home. It took most of the day to get there, riding through forests and meadows blanketed in snow. When they finally crested a hill and Zachary pointed to a valley below, Grace caught her breath. The ranch was modest but well built, with a sturdy cabin larger than the hunting lodge, a barn, and several outbuildings. The land stretched for what looked like miles, bordered by mountains on three sides. It was wild and beautiful and isolated, just like Zachary had warned her. "It's perfect," Grace said. "You haven't seen the inside yet. It's pretty rough. I don't care, it's ours." Over the next few weeks, Grace settled into her new life. She cleaned and organized the cabin, making it feel more like a home. Zachary taught her how to care for the cattle that had survived the winter, how to milk the cow, how to manage the chickens. The work was indeed backbreaking, but Grace didn't mind. She'd never felt more alive or more purposeful. At night, they would sit by the fire, and Zachary would talk more freely than he ever had before. The nightmares came sometimes, waking him in a cold sweat, but Grace learned to hold him through them, whispering reassurances until he calmed. Slowly, the episodes became less frequent. One evening in early March, as the snow began to melt and the first hints of spring appeared, Zachary pulled Grace into his lap. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Giving up Virginia City for this?" "Not for a single second." "Do you regret marrying me?" Marrying you was the smartest thing I've ever done. You saved me, Grace. Just as surely as I saved you from that snow, you saved me from freezing to death emotionally. I didn't even realize how numb I'd become until you made me feel again." Grace kissed him softly. "We saved each other. That's what love does." As spring truly arrived, the ranch came back to life. Zachary worked from dawn to dusk, repairing winter damage and preparing for the busy season ahead. Grace worked beside him, learning quickly and never complaining. They hired a young man from Chico to help with the heaviest work, and slowly the ranch began to prosper. In May, Grace's aunt came to visit, making the journey from Virginia City with a small entourage for safety. Margaret Donovan was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, and she took one look at Grace and Zachary together and relaxed. "I can see you're happy," she said to Grace. "That's all I wanted for you." "I'm more than happy, Aunt Margaret. I'm home." Margaret stayed for a week, getting to know Zachary and approving of the life Grace had built. Before she left, she pulled Grace aside. "Your father would have liked him," she said. "Zachary's a good man. Damaged, maybe, but healing. You're good for each other." "I know," Grace said, hugging her aunt tightly. "Thank you for understanding. Just promise you'll write regularly and come visit when you can." "I promise." After Margaret left, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Grace and Zachary worked the ranch together, growing closer every day. They laughed more, touched more, talked about dreams and plans for the future. Zachary still had his dark moments, but they grew fewer and farther between. Grace's love was the light that kept the shadows at bay. In August, Grace realized she was pregnant. She told Zachary one evening after supper, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "A baby," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We're going to have a baby." "Yes. Are you happy about it?" Zachary pulled her close, his arms wrapped tight around her. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." Terrified, overwhelmed, and absolutely thrilled all at once. "Grace, we're going to be parents. You're going to be an amazing father." "I hope so. God, I hope so." The pregnancy was healthy and Grace bloomed despite the hard work of ranch life. Zachary became almost comically protective, insisting she rest more and work less. He built a beautiful cradle from pine wood, carving intricate designs into the headboard. Grace sewed tiny clothes and blankets, preparing for the new life they'd created together. In March of 1877, exactly 1 year after Grace had settled into the ranch, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, with only Zachary and a midwife from Chico in attendance. But when Grace finally held her son in her arms, every moment of pain was forgotten. "He has your eyes," Zachary said, his voice thick with emotion. "What should we name him?" Grace had been thinking about this for months. "Thomas, after your father." Zachary's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Thomas Wells. A good, strong name for our son." Zachary kissed her forehead, then gently stroked the baby's downy head. "Thank you. For him, for this life, for everything. I never thought I could be this happy again." "We're just getting started," Grace said with a tired smile. "This is just the beginning." She was right. Over the next few years, their family and their ranch both grew. Grace gave birth to 2 more children, a daughter named Sarah in 1879 and another son named James in 1881. The ranch prospered, with their cattle herd growing and their reputation for quality stock spreading throughout California and Nevada. They hired more help as needed, and Zachary proved to be a fair and respected employer. But more important than their material success was the healing that continued in Zachary's soul. The nightmares became rare, then stopped altogether. He smiled easily now, laughed often, and played with his children with unbridled joy. The ice that had encased his heart had melted completely. replaced by the warmth of love and family. One spring evening in 1885, 10 years after Zachary had pulled Grace from the snow, they sat on the porch of their expanded home watching their 3 children play in the yard. Thomas was 8 now, serious and thoughtful like his father. Sarah was 6, bright and curious about everything. James was 4, all energy and mischief. "You ever think about that day?" Grace asked, her hand in Zachary's. "When you found me in the snow?" "Every day," Zachary said. "It was the day my real life began. Everything before that was just existing. You taught me how to live again, Grace. You and our children. You taught me what real love looks like, what it means to be truly known and cherished." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "I fell in love with you so fast, but I had no idea how deep that love would grow. Every year, I love you more than I did the year before." "Same here. I look at you and I still can't believe you chose me, that you saw something worth saving in a bitter, closed-off man who'd given up on happiness. I saw the real you underneath all that protection. I saw your good heart, your strength, your capacity for love. I just had to convince you to see it too." Zachary kissed her temple. Mission accomplished. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land, watching their children play. Thomas was teaching Sarah how to rope a fence post, while James ran circles around them both. The sound of their laughter carried on the evening breeze. "You think we should have more?" Grace asked. Zachary looked at her in surprise. "More children? Why not? We have room and plenty of love to go around." "Grace Wells, you continue to amaze me. Yes, if you want more children, I'm all for it." Grace smiled and kissed him. "Then I think you should know that number 4 is already on the way." Zachary's whoop of joy startled the children, who came running to see what was happening. He picked Grace up and spun her around gently, laughing like a young man without a care in the world. The children joined in, not understanding what was happening but happy because their parents were happy. That night, after the children were asleep, Zachary and Grace lay together in their bed, talking about the future. "What do you think our life will look like in 10 more years?" Grace asked. "Loud, chaotic, full of love," Zachary said. "The ranch will be bigger, our children will be growing up, and you'll still be the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." "Flatterer, truth-teller." He kissed her nose. "I hope our children understand how lucky they are to have you as their mother." "I hope they understand how lucky they are to have you as their father. You're patient and kind and strong. You teach them how to work hard and be honest. You show them what real love looks like." Grace traced his jaw with her finger. "That frightened, isolated man I met in that cabin would never believe who you've become. That man was dying slowly, suffocating in his own pain. You breathed life back into me, Grace. You melted the ice around my heart that I didn't even know was there. I was so frozen I thought I was fine, but I was just barely surviving. You taught me the difference between surviving and truly living. We were meant to find each other. I truly believe that. Everything that happened, every painful step that led us to that mountain pass, it was all so we could be together." "I believe that too," Zachary said. "I believe you're my miracle." The years continued to unfold with both challenges and joys. The 4th baby was another boy, named Michael, born in early 1886. The children grew healthy and strong, learning to work the ranch alongside their parents. Thomas showed a gift for working with animals. Sarah inherited her mother's quick mind and gentle heart. James had his father's determination. And Michael proved to be the family comedian, always making everyone laugh. The ranch continued to prosper. Zachary's reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle spread, and they were able to expand their holdings and improve their home. But despite their success, Zachary and Grace never forgot their humble beginnings or the kindness that had saved them both. They were known throughout the region for helping travelers in need, offering shelter and food to anyone caught in bad weather. Zachary personally rescued 3 more people from winter storms over the years, and Grace always welcomed them into her home with warmth and compassion. They gave generously to those less fortunate, remembering what it was like to have nothing. In 1890, 15 years after their first meeting, the Wells family gathered for a photograph to commemorate the ranch's anniversary. Thomas was 13, tall and broad-shouldered like his father. Sarah was 11, beautiful and intelligent. James was 9, fearless and loyal. Michael was 4, charming and mischievous. And baby Elizabeth, born earlier that year, slept peacefully in Grace's arms. As the photographer prepared his equipment, Zachary looked at his family with overwhelming gratitude. 5 healthy children, a thriving ranch, and the love of the most amazing woman in the world. It was more than he'd ever dreamed possible during those dark years after the war. "Everyone smile," the photographer called out. Zachary put his arm around Grace, his children arranged around them, and smiled wider than he ever had in his life. This was everything. This was what he'd been meant for all along. That night, after the children were in bed, Zachary and Grace stood together on their porch, looking out at the starlit mountains. "You remember what you said to me that day in the snow?" Zachary asked. "When you were trying to convince me to let you help me heal, I said a lot of things." "Which part?" "You asked if I didn't think I'd suffered enough, if I didn't think I deserved to live again." Zachary turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I couldn't answer you then because I didn't believe it, but Grace, you were right. I did deserve to live, to love, to be happy. And you showed me how. You gave me back my life, and I will never stop being grateful for that." "You would have found your way eventually," Grace said. "I just helped speed up the process." "No. Without you, I would have died alone in these mountains, just another forgotten casualty of a war that ended years ago. You didn't speed up my healing. You made it possible. You are the reason I'm the man I am today." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "And you are the reason I know what true love is. When you pulled me from that snow, you didn't just save my life. You gave me a purpose, a home, a family. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted." They kissed as they had 1,000 times before, but it never got old. Each kiss was a promise renewed, a commitment to love through good times and hard times, through joy and sorrow, until their last breath. The years marched on. The children grew and eventually began lives of their own. Thomas took over much of the ranch operation, showing the same skill and integrity his father had. Sarah married a kind man from Chico and gave Zachary and Grace their first grandchildren. James went east to university, but returned to help expand the ranch further. Michael became a doctor, serving the community that had always supported his family. Elizabeth, the baby, grew into a strong, independent woman who could outride and outrope any of her brothers. Through it all, Zachary and Grace remained the heart of the family. They aged together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with wrinkles earned from years of laughter and hard work. But their love never faded. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year. In the spring of 1910, 35 years after Zachary had pulled Grace from the snow, they took a trip back to the hunting cabin where their love story had truly begun. It was harder to make the journey now, both of them in their 60s, but they were determined. The cabin was still standing, maintained over the years by Zachary for occasional use. They spent a week there, just the two of them, reliving memories and marveling at how far they'd come. "I can still see you lying in that bed, looking at me like I was some kind of hero," Zachary said one evening as they sat by the fire. I was terrified of you, do you know that? Terrified of what you made me feel. I knew. You were so determined to keep me at arm's length." Grace laughed. "But I'm nothing if not stubborn. I saw through you from the start. Lucky for me. What would you say to that scared, frozen girl who woke up in this cabin all those years ago? If you could talk to her, what would you tell her?" Grace thought for a moment. "I'd tell her to trust her instincts. I'd tell her that the gruff, distant man taking care of her has the biggest heart she'll ever know. I'd tell her that the next 35 years are going to be the most amazing adventure, full of love and family and joy she can't even imagine yet. And I'd tell her to be brave, because the very best things in life require courage." What would you tell me, the man I was back then? "I'd tell you that the war doesn't define you. I'd tell you that being wounded doesn't make you worthless. I'd tell you that love is coming, and it's going to heal you in ways you never thought possible. And I'd tell you that choosing to open your heart is the bravest thing you'll ever do." Zachary pulled her close, and they sat together in the cabin that had sheltered them both during the most important week of their lives. Outside, spring was transforming the mountains, melting the winter snow and bringing new life to the wilderness. Inside, two people who had saved each other counted their blessings. They returned to the ranch renewed, ready to enjoy whatever years they had left together. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated milestones and achievements, and continued to be the foundation of the family they'd built. When Zachary was 73 and Grace was 71, they sat together on their porch one last time. Zachary had been feeling tired lately, and they both knew his time was drawing short, but he was at peace. "I've had a good life," he said, holding Grace's hand. "Better than I ever deserved." "You deserved every moment of happiness," Grace said firmly. "You earned it. We earned it together. Grace, I need you to promise me something, anything. When I'm gone, don't stop living. Keep laughing, keep loving our children and grandchildren, keep making this world better just by being in it. Don't lock yourself away like I did all those years ago." "I promise," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "But you're not going anywhere yet. We still have time." They did have time, another 5 years of it. Zachary passed peacefully in his sleep in 1920, surrounded by his family, Grace's hand in his until the very end. The last words he spoke were, "Thank you for saving me." Grace mourned him deeply but kept her promise. She lived another 8 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and the love story that had begun in a blizzard. She made sure they understood that real love was worth fighting for, that damaged people could heal, and that sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as disasters. When Grace died in 1928, her children found her diary among her possessions. In it, she'd written about every year of her marriage, every joy and challenge, every moment of love. The final entry, written just days before her death, read, "I was supposed to die in that snow in 1875. Instead, I found life. I found love. I found everything that matters." Zachary thought he was rescuing me, but the truth is we rescued each other. He pulled me from the storm, and I pulled him from the frozen prison of his grief. Together, we built something beautiful. I have no regrets, no sorrows. I lived fully and loved completely. Now I get to see my darling Cowboy again, and we'll have eternity to continue our adventure. What a gift this life has been. The Wells family ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through Thomas and his descendants. Every spring, the family would gather at the old hunting cabin for a reunion, celebrating the love story that had made their entire existence possible. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren heard the tale of how Cowboy Zachary Wells had rescued Grace Donnelly from a snowy pass, and how she had melted the ice around his heart, that he hadn't even known was there. It became family legend, the kind of story that got better with each telling but never strayed from the essential truth at its core. Two broken people had found each other in the wilderness and had chosen to heal together. They had built a life of purpose and meaning, raised a family, created a legacy, and they had loved each other with a depth and devotion that inspired everyone who knew them. The hunting cabin still stands to this day, preserved by the Wells family as a memorial to Zachary and Grace. Visitors can see the narrow bed where Grace recovered, the stone hearth where they first began to open up to each other, the view of the mountains where they confessed their love. A plaque by the door tells their story in brief, ending with the words that Grace herself had written. "We rescued each other." And in that simple truth lies the heart of all great love stories. Nobody can save another person alone. Real love is two people choosing each other, choosing to be vulnerable, choosing to fight through pain and fear and doubt to reach the beautiful life waiting on the other side. Zachary and Grace understood that. They lived it. And their legacy remains a testament to the transformative power of love, courage, and second chances.